Welcome everyone to today's webcast, Selling Backup the Easy Way. Today's focus is on defining the service and the scope of your backup offering. I'm your host, Nick Cavalancia. I'm a former MSP owner and operator, and I currently today have two businesses that focus on understanding the business needs of customers, of solution providers, the analyst firms, and trying to figure out what's going on in technology and make sure that you have sort of a short, concise way of understanding the trends that are going on and what's going to best move your business forward. I'm joined today by Matthew DeWitt. He's a senior sales engineer for SolarWinds. He focuses on backup and recovery. Matthew, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Nick, thank you so much for having me on part two of this webinar series. Part one was really exciting. I hope everybody here has already had a chance to view that, and so I'm just looking for part two.
Yeah, excellent. Glad to hear it. And speaking of that, just a couple of webinar details. Looks like, once again, I have the length missing out of this, so I'm just going to go ahead and cover it. The length of our webinar day is about 30 to 45 minutes, give or take, the time we have here. We try to respect your time and try to make these as short as we can. Sometimes we go a little long when we start getting into a little bit of conversation and the questions that come at the end, which actually is the next topic here. But the questions are welcome at any time. Put those in the chat box. We'll be generally trying to answer the questions at the end of the webcast. And if for some reason we run out of time, someone from SolarWinds MSP will get back to you and answer your question personally. And this webinar is being recorded, and slides will be posted and presented to you in an email after the webinar has been recorded today. So be on the lookout for that. And as Matthew mentioned, this is part two of a four-part series on just focused on selling backup. The first one Matthew and I did together was, what are you actually selling? Are you just selling backup, or is it something else? And we talked about that. It's a great webinar. You should go back and look at the recording. You should be looking for some emails from SolarWinds MSP on that note. Today's focus is on defining the service and scope, and then we've got two more webinars coming up, one on defining SLAs and pricing, and then another one that I have mysteriously titled, Don't Sell It at All. And it's about how you're not really selling backup at all, and why you shouldn't sell backup at all. And you should put a question mark in your head. That's a good thing. Make sure you show up for that one. That's a good one. So make sure you take advantage of the entire series. So the first place we're going to start here is, what are your actual service options in the first place? What is it that you can be selling? And the way that I kind of built this is that I have a kind of three different areas that I think about when you think about what your service options should be when it comes to backup. It's sort of what's being protected, and then what services are you technically performing from your own centric kind of standpoint, and then what are the recovery options that you have, and it's probably some combination therein of these you're going to cover. So the first thing when you think about what's being protected, you've got servers, you have applications, you have data, you have maybe an entire location, everything that's there, endpoints, servers, networking equipment, whatever the case is, and I put operations as sort of maybe a higher level version of locations in case there's multiple locations for a given business. And it might even include things that are in the cloud or things that are on premises. It's sort of what's being protected. That's one way to look at it. We talked about that on our first webinar, a little bit of this sort of centric what's being protected aspect. Now there's also the services that are being performed here. And the reason why I'm listing each of these is that there are ways to decide to what degree, to what measure, how much of each of these services can be performed in connection with one another that creates a service offering. So things like what you're backing up, or the backup services, types that you're providing, the storage that's being used. Is it on premises? Is it in the cloud? Where you're recovering to? Again, is it on premises? Is it in the cloud? Are you recovering just data and files? Are you recovering applications, entire systems, entire operations? Are you providing true disaster recovery, where it's more along the lines of, I'm not just going to recover, let's say, the Exchange server for the sake of conversation, but I'm really trying to actually get your entire business back up and running, and I've built a backup plan that creates that ability to recover. Are you doing continuous recovery? That's another kind of service where you're taking in, let's say, a backup of a given machine, and as soon as it's backed up, it's restored or replicated, depending on the solution that you're using, to a remote site, and so that system is always up to date within the context of a given backup interval. And there's a continuous recovery, so that way there's an ability to fail over somewhat immediately, if you will, when a particular application system location, something goes down, you can flip the switch, and the continuous recovery, I just made a verb out of that. The server that was recovered continuously, that's better to say it that way, is able to be the failover system, and it can come back up and running in a matter of minutes, kind of a thing. There's also the service of just testing. We talked a little bit about this in the last webinar. And the testing is a service where you decide the frequency, what's being tested, to what degree are you doing the testing to make sure that you can recover. And then there's also this idea of just maybe it's white glove where the customer doesn't do anything. You're doing this completely, without any input from them. You've gone through documentation. You've built dependency guides. If you're just new to backup, this might be a little advanced for you, but there's a lot of different services that can be performed here. And then the last part here is the recovery options that you have. Some of you might be thinking, I'm just going to do sort of local backups, local recovery. If that's what you're comfortable with, nothing wrong with that. Some of you might be thinking about recovering to the cloud. Some of you might be, literally you're going to recover to the cloud, and in some cases people just end up staying in the cloud. There's some of that actually does happen these days where they leverage cloud-based infrastructure as a service to recover to, and then just the customer realizes it's just better staying there than it is on premises in certain instances. And then the other one is, it stole my own thunder here, the infrastructure as a service is this last part. So local-based recovery, cloud-based recovery, and maybe as more of a temporary thing, and then infrastructure as a service for kind of more ongoing. And I think maybe the question I'll ask you, Matthew, I'm going to start here is, I've got a lot of factors. I mean, this could overwhelm the audience, and I'm not trying to do that because this needs to be simplified down, but there are lots of ways of kind of breaking up what should I be offering as part of my service. So which one of these factors, or which of these factors I should say, do you see as maybe having the most impact on defining backup services? May help the audience, help me and help the audience. I'll hold this down a little bit.
So for those of you who attended the first webinar, you guys already know my answer here. To reiterate, for those of you who may not have seen it, for me, I think protecting servers and locations, or sites, if you will, are the most important factors of asking the question of what's being protected. Right? So a really great solution is going to inherently give you application and even file level data recovery. It's part of its default service, right? So, clearly backup is the, quote unquote service being performed. I'm doing little air quotes here. That's the service everyone's familiar with. It's the buzzword, it's the keyword, but honestly, it's the method. It's not the objective. The objective is to be able to provide a smooth recovery experience at all levels, at the data level, at the disaster recovery level, and at the testing level. Because if you're not testing your backups, you're doing it wrong. All right, so from a recovery perspective, I think it's all about hybrid cloud. All right, so local only doesn't work, and that's why people do crazy things like rotate USB hard drives, or they send their tapes off-site. Right, these folks have already acknowledged that solely keeping data locally isn't safe, and that's why places exist to send your tapes to. And again, that's why people do those rotations and take those drives off-site. On the opposite side of that spectrum is a cloud-only solution, and that's not an effective solution either, because it means long recovery times, especially if you're in a reactive scenario, right? So a great solution is going to give you hybrid cloud recovery. It's going to give you full retention, both on-site and off-site, and you're going to be able to easily recover from a land-based resource, all right? And that means you're going to get land-based restore speeds. Or if you need to, you're going to be able to recover remote from the cloud, and that would be a disaster, true disaster recovery scenario. Now, infrastructure as a service is really interesting because infrastructure as a service still ties into hybrid cloud backup. You can use both. You can take your hybrid cloud backup and transfer that data to an infrastructure as a service. Infrastructure as a service is the most costly option. Doesn't mean it's a bad option, but it is the most costly. So if you have the tools to do that within your own arena, within your own, maybe you as a managed service provider provide that service, you can save you and your customers a lot of money, but you can still take that hybrid cloud and transfer it to infrastructure as a service if you ever need to.
Love that answer, and I think that you and I are both in agreement here. For you guys that are totally new to backup and are just thinking about getting into it, and I opened the door by putting it on the slide, and obviously, and Matthew, you're kind enough to comment on it. I think Matthew and I would both tell you guys that if you're brand new, don't be thinking about that yet. The hybrid cloud is probably the best thing. That's where you should be starting. The infrastructure as a service is something where that's a far more advanced offering, and that's something down the pipe. But for those of you that are already doing backup to some degree, you're trying to figure out what should my offering look like. I'm really trying to figure this out because it's not really making me a lot of money. Then maybe it's an option for you, but it's not exactly, maybe you're not ready for it. But in essence, maybe we should just jump into the next slide, because really we want to talk about what is the offering that you should be coming up with. And in some ways, it really isn't even about the services or the things that you could offer. It really needs to be what's right for your customer. At the end of the day, you can offer the world, and if your customer doesn't need that, you're kind of a solution looking for a problem, in essence. which means no one's going to buy it. And so you have to really think about, what is it first off that your customers are asking for. I used an example in the last webinar we did where some of you might have customers that are solely, let's say, law firms, and they have vastly different needs than, let's say, a hospital. Or something like that. There's different compliance standards, there's different security needs, there's different retention needs, and so you have to think about what they're actually asking for in terms of data protection for just data for their systems for their entire business. And then, what do they really need to have protected? This is sort of where you take their answer of, from a business standpoint, what they think they really need protection from or they need backups of, and then you going from a technical standpoint. So if they're saying, I need my email protected, you have to go backwards and say, all right, well, that translates into either that one Exchange server or it's on premises, or if it's a large organization, maybe it's 10 Exchange servers that are all working together across multiple locations or whatever, and so you've got to kind of do a little bit of translation there. You want to think about the business objectives that the customer has. What are they trying to accomplish? We end up talking about things like RTOs and RPOs from our standpoint, right? Recovery time objectives. How long do you have to recover? That's your goal. And then recovery point objectives. How much data can you lose? In essence, I don't want to lose any more than, let's say, 15 minutes. That's an RPO of 15 minutes as an example. And, but the customer is going to say something like, I can't be without my CRM system for more than an hour. And so now you've got an idea of, okay, I have a recovery time of probably less than an hour, and I have a recovery point of probably less than an hour, for that particular system. And I'm not trying to get too much in the weeds yet because we're going to talk about some of that on some of the other upcoming webcasts. But in essence, when you're trying to define what the offering looks like for your customers, you got to think about what their objectives are from a business standpoint, and then you translate that into things like, oh, well, they really need to have recovery like instantaneously, so maybe I should be doing continuous recovery. They don't know what that is, but you do, because you're thinking about it from what are the capabilities of your backup solution that you've chosen. And that's where I mentioned here, kind of taking the business objectives, translating them into recovery objectives. And I've also got one other kind of calculation I normally tie in besides RTOs and RPOs, and it's something called MTPOD. It's the maximum tolerable period of disruption. I don't know if that's actually an industry standard term, but I just like using it. It's basically how long till the stuff hits the fan. Like I cannot be out of business for more than 4 hours, or then I'm just dead in the water. I start losing so much of my bleeding cash at that point. And that is something else that is really good for you to know, so that there's a line in the sand, because you might be thinking server A has an RTO of an hour, and server B has an RTO of an hour, and so on. And maybe you're thinking of these things serially, but in some total it takes 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, 2 days, 3 days to do. MTPOD is like, I got 4 hours. And so that translates differently into the service you need to be offering that customer. And then lastly here is what technology and services are necessary. So you're trying to figure out, in essence, if I talk about this big picture, this entire slide, big picture from the top bullet to the bottom bullet to explain the bottom bullet, you're starting with the business and what the business needs, and you work backwards all the way to, therefore, what technology do I need to have in place? Both the backup solution, the use of the cloud, the hybrid cloud, whether I'm going to have something on premises for continuous recovery on an image, some kind of server locally, or something in the cloud, and what services do I have to provide? And so the question I'm thinking of here, maybe asking you first, Matthew, is what other customer-centric factors? I've kind of given a couple here, so the business objectives, things like that. But what other customer-centric factors should come into play when sort of defining the offering, do you think?
Well, I think you've already hit the nail on the head. Data loss and downtime, period, right? So if you're a business that doesn't lose money when it's not running, then you probably don't need backup at all. Right? And so I highly doubt that anybody here today is representing a business model that doesn't lose money when it's not operating. So again, the biggest factors are going to be data loss and downtime, because this is what causes businesses to lose revenue. All right, and so backup, or more specifically in this case, recovery, is going to make sure that when the need arises, you can minimize lost profits due to unexpected downtime. All right, our customers, what they want is a flexible hybrid cloud solution that gives them the ability to design services around their customers' needs. It allows them to grow with their customers, and it allows them to provide service in a good, better, best format, depending on the scope of the customer.
Great answer. Any other considerations? I mean, something we just didn't talk about here that you think of that should be in the mix besides what's right for the customer? Anything else?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's really important to be prepared for the unexpected, which means the ability to recover anything, anywhere, right? If you over narrow your offering, you're not going to be flexible, right? You're going to be brittle, and when you get pressure from the side, you're going to break, right? And so you need a flexible solution that you can respond to things like ransomware by restoring at the delta level, all right? So, and what that's going to do for you is that's going to minimize data transfer and therefore downtime. The less time you spend recovering, the less time you're down, right? And so you want to do this from the fastest location possible, which again points us back to hybrid cloud. You want recovery from a land-based resource unless your whole site is lost.
Great answer. So let's do this. Let's actually talk about maybe taking all these things we've talked about and applying it to come up with a tangible service scope for our audience here. And before I've kind of a grid here I'm going to put up here in a second for you guys in the audience, and give you an example of coming up with an actual set of service scopes. And the first thing, though, I want you to understand, though, is scope is really about perception from the customer. You know, do they understand it? And I'm going to talk about a couple factors here in just a second, but you want the customer to perceive that the service that you're providing them is not only going to protect them, but it gives them comfort and confidence in that, in terms of a couple things. First off is the value. Are they getting the right value for the money? And a lot of that overlaps with pricing and SLA, which we're talking about in the next webcast. So you're going to need to probably attend that one as well. But the value they're getting does depend on, you know, what you are charging them for that, what are the SLAs they're getting in that, but they want to see value, and that's part of the perception. They're perceiving value in the service offering, the scopes that you're offering in there. You want to keep it simple. And here's what I mean. If you come up with a service scope, and I'm going to throw some pricing in just to kind of make this really confusing on purpose, where you say, all right, it's $4 per workstation per month, but for every 10th workstation, you get that one at a 15% discount. And then it's $8 per server per month, but then every 5 servers, you get one free. But then if I do your entire environment, you get a 20% discount on all that data. It's like, it's way too confusing at that point. You maybe do a lot of math, and I can't keep up with you. It's got to be simple. It has to be just a very simple type of offering. And the other one here is you've got to keep it structured. And the structured here is to do it in a way that gives the customer a sense that you understand what their needs are, you have a mastery over the service that you're offering, and it's structured that way, and that and then again coming back that the value, the pricing, the SLAs, all in there, it fits, it feels right in the structure. And an example that I have here is sort of good, better, best. I'm a big fan of good, better, best here, because with good, better, best, you tend to give customers a choice, and sort of rules of marketing and rules of psychology would always dictate that if people are given a choice, or they perceive that they're given a choice, they feel more like they are in control, and they're more apt to choose something. I mean, even just to give you an example, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about today, but if you were to ask someone for a favor, where you say, hey, can I borrow your car tomorrow? And if you were to say, look, I'll understand if you have to say no, it's totally fine. And you throw that in there. See, now what I've done is I've given you a choice. I've given you the choice that you can say no. You aren't feeling pressure that you must say yes because I asked you to let me borrow your car. Now that I've given you the option of a choice, you feel like you're more in control and you're more apt to give me the car. It's how it works. It's just psychology. So having good, better, best sits in here. So I've got a couple things where I've added in, like here's good. Maybe it's just going to be what I'm going to call the tier 1, the critical applications, therefore the systems and the data and so on tied with that. Maybe there's some kind of specific SLA for that particular tier of application, and it's all local-based recovery. I'm not advocating this is the answer. I'm just simply giving you an example. Better might be tier 1 and tier 2 apps. So now we're going to include not just the critical stuff, but the less critical stuff. And it's some of the workstations. Maybe it's like the CEO's workstations, the different department heads, or the C-suite, or whatever. You have a different SLA. Maybe there's is it biannual? Should it be semi-annual? I want it to be twice a year, so maybe that should have been semi-annual as I think about that. Matthew, which is that? Is that semi-annual? I think that's semi-annual, right?
Yeah, I mean, it can go, again, quarterly. It depends.
Yeah, whatever it is.
Service.
Well,
yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's best though. I think I have the wrong term there. I think what I'm saying. I think I meant to say semi-annual there, but maybe that's hybrid recovery. Maybe doing something into the cloud. Maybe some stuff is on-prem, and then you got best here. Maybe it's basically everything, and it's got a third SLA of whatever that is, and there's quarterly testing, continuous recovery, hybrid recovery, and so the idea here is just to build something where you've got it structured and it's understandable. This is much like, in all honesty, go to a gas station today that has a car wash, and they always have that little car wash placard, above the gas pump, and it tells you can get the good, better, and best, and they tell you what you get, and they align all the things so you can see all the stuff that's in good is also in better, but you get these extra 2 things, and all the stuff that's in better is in best, but you also get these extra 3 things. Then of course they have pricing and whatever else. And so this is where you keep it structured, but you do keep it simple, and that's why things like, if you notice even the way that I did this, Tier 1 apps, Tier 2 apps, all servers and apps, and all workstations, and I have them kind of going across where they all match. So if I'm even presenting it to the customer, it's structured enough where they can understand them and see how they differ very quickly, and that way they can perceive the value. And then when you do pricing at the end, they can tie in pricing and see if they perceive, again back to perception, if they perceive that the pricing you have meets the value, and then you can drive them to the particular service scope that you want. So Matthew, I've defined one way to structure this. I've got to imagine there's a couple other models you've seen. What are some of those models, or even one that you've seen that's maybe a different way of trying to kind of build and model a service scope?
The truth is the 3-tier model, the good, better, best, really is a solid way to go, because unless you have a what do they call those, like a vector or a target audience that's very explicit. Let's say it's always car dealerships, or it's always this thing. Unless you're that narrowly focused, you can't offer one size fits all, right? Because every organization that you absorb is going to have slightly different needs, right? And so at the end of the day, if you were to say, well, I'm going to offer the best service to 100% of my customers, right? The truth is that everyone wants 100% uptime until they see the cost, right? And so not every business really needs continuous recovery or even proactive offsite disaster recovery. So having a solution that's flexible enough to service all 3 tiers on demand is incredibly valuable. Now, you used the car wash example, and I'd like to kind of work on that. You got your standard car wash, then you've got your next tier where you get maybe wax or some nice smelling soap, and then you've got your top tier where they're going to polish your wheels and you're going to get hand dried. And so what I want to point out here is, at the end of the day, you're in all 3 tiers, you're still getting a car wash, right? And so it's incredibly important to have only small differences in tier offerings, right? That core technology, the core of your business, which in your case was car wash, in my case is disaster recovery, the core technology should be available at all tiers. So for example, with our products, even at the lowest tier, quote unquote, you're still getting best-in-class features like Delta Recovery and a hybrid cloud model, right? And so this ensures consistent experience both to you and to your customers as you both grow.
The other thing I want to note here is that you guys in the audience need to define a service scope. And somebody didn't put on the slide, and now as I'm thinking about this, it's really important. I did some writing on this very topic. It's one of the blogs I've done on SolarWinds MSP's website, and it's basically around the fact that if you don't define your service scope, then what's going to happen is your customer is going to define it for you, and you're going to agree to it because you want the business. By the way, it's a very powerful point in your own business if you work for yourself to be able to say no. But a lot of us aren't in that position. You have to say yes to everything because you want the work. And so you have to define this, otherwise your customer does, and they're going to define something that where the SLAs are out of whack, you're responsible for everything, and any little thing that goes wrong, now they're holding you hostage, and you don't get to charge you more money for that. That's not a different tier of service. So defining this is a lot around just the fact that you want to establish what you're offering and what they're getting for their money, and period, and that's it. I love the note, Matthew, about there's a core set of value there, but you want to make sure they understand, even just down to like SLAs. Well, your SLA is only 4 hours, and that's what you get. And you wanted a 2-hour SLA, well, you didn't buy the best package, you bought the better package. And
Nick,
Matthew,
you're so
thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're so right. Here's the truth. I'm in this business every day, and so are you. And I can't tell you how many times a day I have customers, my customers, managed service providers, just like the people in this webinar, that come to me that are being held hostage by their customers because they failed to set a service level agreement. They failed to set those expectations, and now their customer thinks they're responsible for everything. And it's just not the reality, right? You need to set defined expectations, and like you said, you need the ability to say no. And that goes back to our first webinar about having confidence in the service you're offering. That's the confidence to say yes. It's also the confidence to say no, and no when a deal's not good for you.
Yeah, good point. So as a matter of fact, that even ties into a little bit of this last slide that I've got here, which is for you guys in the audience there, you don't have to offer everything, and that's important. You know, I listed a ton of different factors and elements that come into what could be part of your service scope, showed you good, better, best, and then there's a lot of different sets of detail, and you're going, holy crap, what am I supposed to do? You don't have to offer everything. You know, if backup is new to you, that's fine. You know, it's a good place to be able to say, I don't offer those services, especially if you can't deliver on them. I always tell my customers whenever I'm dealing with any kind of speaking engagements, or I'm writing, or I'm doing something around helping them craft their messaging and so on, I tell them if it's something that I can't do, I'm going to tell you I can't do it, because if I promise you I can do it, I'm setting us both up for failure. And that's something you don't want. You guys don't want to set yourself and your customer for failure, because what ends up happening, you've lost that customer. I'd rather tell them no. And that's the best thing here. So you might look at starting with something that's more scaled down. The scope of devices is limited, the scope of services, or just the scope of recoverability, any of those things. And that's okay. Especially because if to your point earlier, Matthew, about as long as you don't have all car dealerships or all law firms or whatever it is, and you can come up with a very small set of services that might work perfect for your particular customer in the audience. Maybe you've got much smaller mom and pop kind of shops, so they've got 10 or 15 workstations, and it's a relatively simple network with 1 or 2 servers, and that's really where your sweet spot is. Then maybe that's where you start. Start with something that works there. And then the other thing here is to keep in mind that you might try to align your backup services with the other offerings that you currently have. So for example, if you're just doing RMM, I'll kind of make this up off the cuff here, but let's say you're doing RMM around really just their servers, and they don't even want you doing any services on their workstations except for break fix. So maybe services like a monthly recurring revenue stream is just around the servers, then maybe that's where your backup starts, because that's one where you already have control over. That's where you're a trusted advisor. Maybe that's where you should start, and then you grow your business by trying to increase your penetration within that customer. Matthew, what have you seen partners start with, and maybe what did that grow into? Maybe that's a good first question on this slide.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that I see a lot is, people have a plethora of solutions. They have like 5 different solutions in place. And a very common call that I get is, hey, I'm coming to you because I want to consolidate, right? I've got 5 different service offerings here. It's crazy trying to keep up with all this. I need one product that can do everything I need. And so, again, most of our customers started their career as break fix, so they just, they used the tool that was right for the particular job that was in front of them, without the scope or the vision to see the scope of change in the future. So they were 100% reactive, and in time is what it takes. In time they learned the benefits of a proactive business model, right? Having the right tools for the job is key here, and the right tool should scale with your customer base, right? The right tool should be able to meet your customers and your business needs as it grows, right, from reactive break fix all the way to proactive continuous testing.
Good stuff. Have you ever seen backup kind of align with other services for different partners?
Oh, of course, absolutely. So backup is the final layer in a layered security model. All right, you've got antivirus, which is going to respond after infection has entered your network. You've got web protection to try and keep those infections out of your web browser, much like mail filtering does for email. Backup's your last line of defense, but it should definitely not be your only line, right? If you're only doing backup, again, not only are you inviting your competitors in, but you're not protecting your customer, right? Ransomware, it's going to use vectors, right? Not all of them are easy to prevent, like human involvement, zero-day exploits, etc. So having a good backup in place is just one of many layers to being prepared to respond to these threats.
Sorry, I put myself again on mute. I keep doing that every time I have a webinar. I put myself on mute when I think I'm on mute, and I think I take myself off mute. Sorry about that. So let's do this. We've got a couple of questions that have already come in, and you guys in the audience continue. Go ahead, keep putting some questions in, and we're going to answer those in just a second here. Matthew, would you do a quick, give us a 2-minute overview of what SolarWinds MSP offers?
Absolutely. So again, for those of you who weren't in the first webinar, you haven't seen this slide yet. For those of you who were, you've probably seen it already. But again, SolarWinds MSP offers, everything from SMB all the way through enterprise IT coverage, right? I'm a specialist in backup. That's what I do all day. But what do you do when backup needs to tell someone else that it has a problem? What do you do when you need to assign a technician work? Are you going to use a good old sneakernet, you can run down the hall and find Bill so he can go, get in his truck and drive to the customer and fix the problem. That's not an efficient business model, all right? That's not going to help you grow your business. Growing your business means doing more work with less resources, right? And it doesn't mean overworking yourself. It means working smarter, right? So backup needs to tie into a ticketing system, all right? The ticketing system is going to alert the technician who's going to use remote control as opposed to, a gasoline-consuming vehicle to get to the customer site and provide a solution, right? Mail security and data security are things that are, we hope will help prevent those infections from coming in, and then backup's going to help you restore if they've already gotten in, right? And so you can use these tools, individually. If you want to start off as break fix and have a narrow focus, you can do that. And when you're ready, you can grow into more of a core offering provider. And so that's going to look something like the MSP RMM or MSP Central, depending on the size of your business model, right? And so that's going to include things like monitoring, full automation, so you can take one fix and apply to multiple devices, patch management, reporting, so you can, not only show yourself, but show your customers what work are they paying for, what are they doing, right? Again, the remote control, because it's about automation and being able to get more work done in a short window of time. And then, this all scales all the way to enterprise IT. All right, so we can do this for small networks as well as large complex networks as well. So we really do have an A to Z offering, and so you can use whatever vector you want to come into this business and really become the service provider of choice.